This thing on? All right, let's see if I remember how to work this. Okay, there we go. All right, then we're back. And, let me tell you about what happened to me recently. It was one of those, we have a best day ever. Like, you can't believe that this day just was as cool as it was, right? Had a super early morning shift, got off work early, and then I got to give my good friend a flight review in a vintage biplane. That's right, Olive. Actually, the vintage biplane from a few episodes back. And it was amazing. Then right after that, I went and gave a talk to something like 100 people about our local tower stuff here at West Coast Delta. And it was fun. Like, not just kind of fun, but like actually fun. I almost felt like a stand-up comic. I don't know. I stand in front of this mic, I talk to you, it's fun, but I've actually never really done that before. It was cool. Anyway, I met so many friends again that I hadn't seen in, a year, and it was amazing. I even actually scored a possible side gig opportunity out of the thing. But it was a feeling that I haven't felt in so long. The grind of having all that stuff to do was also the fuel. It was so neat to have that to do again, and I just couldn't wait to do it more. Well, I'm not going to give the flight review on the biplane for another 2 years, but hey, I can make a podcast, right? And with that, the show's back. These last couple months have just been something for me, I think. Maybe the best way to describe it is just a total reset. Like all of the hard lessons learned over the last year and a half, plus a bunch of great stuff too, but all put together in a new package. And with that, the show's back, and I'm doing it with a bang, because Chad's here. And I've got a great reading from one of my favorite magazines. It's a car magazine, actually, that sums up the enthusiasm that we feel probably better than I ever could. Don't go away. So while I was quote unquote away, I actually got a lot of feedback and emails, and even a few new patrons too, and we're going to talk about them in a minute. But first, the elephant in the room. It's the last week of July, and no, I'm not at Oshkosh. I actually did plan to go. I even got the whole week off, a bit of last year. But this summer, for whatever reason, I felt the need to be home and getting things back on track more than ever before. And actually, I'm glad I did, because a lot transpired over this last week of July, and I was really glad to be home for it. Actually, including making this episode. So anyway, with that, next year. But let's move on. What better place to start with feedback and emails from all of you out there on the other side of the mic? So here we go. David Bonici sent 3 coffees all the way from Australia. Thanks, David. He also wrote, I've been working from home for a year, which means I haven't really been listening to podcasts in the car, but been able to catch up with some of yours, including Languish, which is a great insight into how COVID affected people beyond aviation. It was also interesting to hear a different side of you and, of course, Rob Mark. Anyway, I hope things continue to be on the up for both of you. Looking forward to some new episodes. David from Melbourne. Well, thanks, David. And, that's exactly what it was. It was a little different side of us. I don't think maybe even we even knew those sides of us existed, but it felt good to talk about them. And we were, like I keep saying, afraid that was going to turn into like a wine fest or something like that. And I'm really glad that that's not how it was taken by everyone. So again, thank you for your feedback and for your support of the show. We also have some new patrons. Christian became a patron. He didn't leave a note or anything, but welcome, Christian, and thank you. As did Scott Sutton. And Scott Sutton, he's a cool guy. I met him. He came and visited the tower pre-COVID, and he has a Diamond Twin Star, so DA42. Scott sent me an email that said, "Happy birthday there, Bravo Golf." He actually knew my birthday. I'm impressed. He said, "You might not remember me, but you let me graciously have a tour of the tower cab back in happier pre-COVID days, and then shortly thereafter mentioned the tour and my name on your cool podcast. Fast forward, was just down recently to your fair city and wanted to reach out to you again. I was hoping there might even be time for a quick flight in the Twin Star, but maybe next time. Sadly, my mother passed away a few months ago, and I was scrambling these last 3 visits, wrapping up the affairs, but naturally I was listening for your distinctive voice on frequency. Yet, unfortunately for me anyway, caught you on days or times that you just were off duty. Anyway, you happen to have a link that you could send me to make a donation to your terrific podcast? I've been meaning to do that for quite some time. And if you ever see a Diamond Twin Star flying around with cool-looking red spinners on it, you know you're looking at Scott. Evan Shue sent another note from basically down under. He said, "Hey, mate, just a quick note to say hi. Hope things are going okay in California. Cheers, Evan." Like, well, Evan, they were going, that's for sure when you sent that, but we're good now, and we're back. So thanks for the note. I really appreciate it. And also Glenn Towler, he's down there too, and he said, "I've been depressed lately due to the fact that I hate my job and won't be going to Oshkosh this year due to the borders being closed, so I know how you feel." Yeah, man. Next year, though. And friend of the show, Daniel Sternberg, wrote, he said, I was bummed to read your note about the doldrums you were feeling, but I was really jazzed to get the new episode email last time, and even if the topic was an exploration of the doldrums you were feeling. Actually, I think it's an important topic and really valuable for you and Rob to have shared your experiences and observations. And if I come up with any pithy insights on dealing with pandemic languish, I'll be sure to share them. I think I've been hit less hard than many, and not because I'm a pilot and therefore a superhero, haha, but more for reasons I don't really recommend. Phil and I are both way introverts, so the lack of socializing has not weighed on us too heavily. And we've been able to do just enough getting together with friends in their spacious backyard where we all stay well apart or on Zoom over cocktails to keep us feeling satiated. We're retired, so we don't have to deal with personalities at work, and what little social media I do is limited to a highly pruned and occasionally repruned group of like-minded friends. So yeah, I guess I'm part of the echo chamber problem too. And of course, we've been able to get out flying, so I haven't experienced the nonstop tedium of being in the same place during the various phases of lockdown. Fortunately, most of our relatives believe in science and are highly risk-averse, so we haven't lost anyone close. The biggest sense of loss for us has been the establishments that we would frequent before COVID, or during or because of COVID, that went out of business and that we'll see no more, like the steakhouse on Kauai, or the beachside restaurant that's a short walk from the FBO in Santa Barbara that had become a favorite destination as California was finally improving and then starting to reopen last summer. Anyway, best, Daniel. Well, Daniel, thanks. I mean, I know that's all behind us now and good riddance, but yeah, the effects are just going to last. All those, I mean, I don't know, I've lost probably 3 or 4 of my favorite restaurants as well, and just places you used to go and feel comfortable and that were there. I mean, frankly, that existed, and now they don't. Catherine Stafford wrote a cool email comment, plus she shared a podcast too. She said, what a real vulnerable episode, the one with you and Rob Mark. I loved it. I felt and sounded like therapy. Bravo. Very brave, especially for 2 men, especially in aviation. I'm a nurse, and I feel like I'm in a parallel universe from so many others. Be safe and enjoy what you can. Lima Hotel commented, Brandon, thanks to you and also Rob Mark for that unique and interesting recap of your pandemic feelings. It's welcome and appreciated. Funny thing, everybody has a different personal perspective, don't we? In my case, GA flying, which is just a hobby, was my main escape outlet during the shutdown months. It was all the other stuff that I was feeling different about. In my case, I worked on my next rating, hitting the books and eventually getting back into the air for instruction once the rules allowed for that. As a goal-oriented guy, that offered me one small sphere of control and measurable progress. Then in contrast, the rest of my world felt stranded and neutral. The general passage of time during 2020 was truly weird too. Months seemed to fly by so swiftly, but simultaneously, it felt like the pandemic had been going on forever. Quite a paradox. As you suggested, let's be optimistic that life will return to a better normal, informed by our experiences and our lessons learned. Keep up the great podcast effort. Cheers. Lima Hotel. Yeah, man, thank you so much. That really sums it up. And I really felt that about the sort of time paradox. Things went by so fast without those markers of, the summer vacations and things that you normally do. But at the same time, it felt like it took forever too. So I don't know. Was it fast? Was it slow? But yeah, I'm glad that aviation was able to keep you going through this time. And lastly, and certainly not least, as you're about to find out, a friend of the show, Daniel Switkin, wrote in. He says, hey, Brandon, I hope you're doing well. As someone who used to do an RC podcast for years, I know what it's like to struggle with new content and lose steam sometimes, but I wanted to send some encouragement by saying that I really enjoy the show and I hope that it returns soon. On that topic, I think a great episode could be how to go from commercial pilot to CFI. My experience is that private pilot license, IFR, and commercial pilot license are all quite clear about what to do, but CFI is proving more ambiguous. For example, how do you know when you're ready to teach? Do you need to create your own lesson plans from scratch? Is it worth getting an AGI first? What plane and instructor should you choose? Is it worth doing a CFI boot camp like an accelerated program? Well, you know what? That is one of the best questions I've had in a long time. And, as we turn over a new leaf, I thought it'd be cool to start with a bang. So I called Chad and we're going to talk about some, stuff or whatever. But we both like Daniel's idea so much that we went with that instead. So courtesy of Daniel, Chad and I are going to talk about the long road to becoming a CFI today. And as you listen, I think you're going to realize that the subplot of our talk is basically just enthusiasm. And speaking of which, those who know me well know I'm enthusiastic about a few things other than just aviation and family. And one of those things is European cars and racing. I'm an avid reader of Car Magazine from England, and one of their longest-running columnists, Gavin Green, in his way of being a cunning linguist, couldn't help it, he wrote this piece about Murray Walker, who, if you're not familiar with, was an English motorsport commentator and journalist, and he provided the commentary of live Formula One coverage for the BBC, basically since 1976, I think. And he passed away last March, but he was often referred to as the voice of F1. And he was also known for his, occasional slipping up and saying some pretty funny stuff. Anyway, here's the article from Gavin Green from Car Magazine that says it so much better than I ever could. The first time I met the late great Murray Walker, he spoke of his hero worship for Tasio Nuvolari, greatest of the 30s racing drivers. I liked him immediately. It was hard not to. What really impressed was his high-octane enthusiasm for motor racing, and for Formula One in particular, and it was backed up by enormous knowledge. His effervescence was why he was preeminent as a commentator. You feel the gusto and forgive the gaffes. Passion can be wonderful. One of the things that impressed me about the UK when I arrived from Australia 40 years ago was the nation's unmatched fervor for often obscure pastimes, everything from bird watching to bus spotting. I'd never heard of plane or train spotters until I arrived here, although on a smaller scale I'm sure they do exist in Australia. A close friend who lives nearby and loves airplanes. He travels to the Super Bowl every year, not to watch the football, but to stay in an airport hotel to look at the 1,200 or so private jets that land in the host city. He chose his house in Richmond, partly because it's under the Heathrow flight path. Once I went to a gathering of the Morris Marina Owners Club, set up with the, quote, intention of recognizing the place of the marina and the Ital and all of its derivatives in motoring history, end quote. I do not share the 300-plus members' enthusiasm for marinas or Itals, but I salute their passion. On a much bigger scale, I went to a Land Rover gathering. It was more of a full-blown show in Warwickshire a decade or so ago. There were thousands of people, all with a zeal for old Landies and Range Rovers. Land Rover's off-road guru Roger Craythorne was the headline act, and he was mobbed. A few years ago, I was cycling in the South Downs when a procession of old MGs of every type drove the other way. We stopped and chatted on a blissfully sunny late spring day, with the oaks in a new leaf and the chestnuts in full bloom, red kites circling above. Those MG enthusiasts love their cars and their driving, as only classic car drivers can. Enthusiasms are indeed a wonderful thing, and all the more refreshing in a social media-fueled age of rage and noise. And it's not just social media. I'm tiring of the BBC's evening news, convinced that any foreigner unused to Britain would conclude that this is a bigoted, angry nation, scarred by corruption, violence, and prejudice. Enthusiasms can be a welcome corrective to such depressing output. This is why my favorite modern F1 driver is Daniel Ricciardo. He's always smiling, always upbeat. The others may complain and look glum when, as Daniel points out, quote, they have the best job in the world. Most have no passion for their sport's history either, which is very sad. They race for the thrill and the money and the fame, but they don't love their sport as Murray did. The exception, I'm told, is Sebastian Vettel. He knows about Grand Prix history and has a collection of old F1 cars, including the ex-Nigel Mansell 1992 Williams FW14B bought last summer. He also owns an old Fiat 500, as well as numerous Ferraris, including an F40. Happily, Carlos Sainz is also apparently knowledgeable. No doubt, given his new employment, his collection of Ferraris will soon grow too. In 2013, I interviewed Bradley Wiggins. He was in Italy preparing for the Giro d'Italia, and my story included a ride together up a mountain behind Lake Garda. We had breakfast in the Lakeside Hotel before our ride, and Wiggins, a connoisseur of cycling history and collector of memorabilia, led me to an adjoining room. Framed on the wall was Johnny Bugnot's World Championship jersey from 1992. Sir Bradley then told me the story of his victory. The enthusiasm of the defending Tour de France champion and Olympic gold medalist was profound and contagious. Wiggo loves his sport, not just the doing and the winning, but the history and the romance. Enthusiasms are often scoffed at and dismissed, ridiculed, even disparaged. But they're refreshing beacons of happiness in a world of noisy negativity, and no one's enthusiasm shone brighter than Murray Walker's. Well, that article from former Car Magazine editor Gavin Green is just amazing. I don't think I could say it any better myself. And the fact that he went through so many different sports too, and I think pretty much everything he said is 100% applicable to aviation. Anyway, Murray Walker's enthusiasm shone through in every broadcast he ever made. Gavin Green's enthusiasm shows through in every article that he writes, which is why I still love reading the magazine this many years on. And when I think about people in my life that are always enthusiastic about aviation and sports and other fun things like that, I think of Chad. All right, man. Well, first off, Chad, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Glad to be back as always.
How long has it been? It's been like a year, hasn't it?
It's been several months, if not, 10, 11, 12 months.
Yeah, actually, last time you were here, you'd done more flying in the beginning of the pandemic than you had really ever done before, right?
I had. Actually, speaking of that, this May was the busiest month I've ever had, May of 21.
How many hours you put in?
73.
Nice. Go anywhere fun?
Oh, yeah. Fort Lauderdale, a couple of times. Greensboro, North Carolina once. Went out to Monterey, California. That's always nice. Hit Phoenix and Fort Collins, Colorado, I think.
Cool. Well, we're going to do an episode anyway, and here we are. But like 2 days ago, right before this, friend of the show, Daniel Switkin, sent in a question. I think we're just going to talk about that because it's kind of is relevant to, well, everybody really. So let's just do it. He writes, I think a great episode idea could be how to go from commercial pilot to CFI. My experience is that PPL, IFR, and CPL are all quite clear about what to do, but then the CFI is proving more ambiguous. For example, how do you know when you're ready to teach? Do you know, or do you need to create your own lesson plans from scratch? Is it worth getting an AGI first? What plane and instructor should you choose? Is it worth doing a CFI boot camp or an accelerated program? So those are all, well, it's a bunch of questions, but we can definitely talk about this a lot because I think you and I did ours kind of similarly, but different places and different times. But these are questions that are pretty much relevant to anybody who's going to be a CFI, right?
I think so. I've asked myself these questions more than once.
Yeah. Real quick before we move on, I think the favorite word in this was when he says ambiguous. And I think that a lot of people get into aviation really kind of like, maybe they don't like, but they respond to the sort of rules-based culture, whereas here's the regs, here's the rules, here's the checklist, here's the procedure, here's the memorization, here's the memory items, here's the mnemonic, whatever. But there's all these things you can do that kind of have an answer. But then you get into the ambiguity stuff where there isn't really an answer. And for the non-gray area people, this can really prove difficult. Are you a gray area person, Chad, or you like black and white better?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I know.
I like black and white is good, but there's always going to be gray areas in things that are out there, and you just have to kind of look at it and make the best you can out of what you think a gray area might be.
Yeah, that whole use your judgment thing, right?
Yes.
I mean, this happens on our side of the microphone too, all the time. I used to work with a guy who was very, very, very black and white. Like he could not take any degree of ambiguity. And working at an airport like mine, that did not work very well. But if you worked at a more proceduralized type place, I think he would have thrived there. And he actually is at a more procedural type place now, and radar no less. So I think he's a lot happier. But for me, I would consider myself kind of a gray area person. I don't jump towards the this or that type thing, like the dualistic thinking. Like I always think of the more dichotomous thinking where it's not this or that, it's both, right? But then when you have both, how are you going to wade through what's the right thing to do with it? And I think the CFI, and maybe for anybody who's actually a pretty good teacher, yourself included, Chad, of course, is being able to have sort of a goal, like this is defined as the thing, but how we're going to get there and what it looks like, you're willing to work with, and you have to work with what that person has and what you have and the aircraft and the weather and all those fun things we got to deal with on every flight we do, and be able to actually take that instead of just being like, here's the answer, this is the syllabus, learn it or don't. You know what I mean? But I think that's what makes teaching difficult for people who don't like to teach.
True. A way to explain ambiguity in terms that we relate directly to aviation would be IFR versus VFR. IFR is going to be very black and white in routing, getting from one place to another. Where you could fly an IFR across the country, here's your flight plan, boom, there's your route, boom. You might get a reroute or a change along the way. If you were to do that same thing VFR, your limits on what you can do are limitless. Where do you head? How do you do it? Straight line. Do you need to go around anything? When you need to deviate, do you have to ask? It's all very, very, very gray area in theory, as long as you remain within the rules, which are a lot looser VFR than IFR.
Right. But then again, you're not messing with flying when you can't see either. So. Yeah.
True.
Well, so how about this then? When did you know that you were ready to teach?
I had an instructor named Jason Wood, and he flies for Southwest Airlines now, which is not really part of the deal, but that's just what he's doing. He's a super guy, and he told me when I was working on my commercial. He said, you need to think about, because I was already on track to do the CFI thing. There was no debate. I was just going all the way through. And he said, during the commercial, what you need to do is you need to be able to teach me everything we're doing every time we go fly. And if you can do that, just talk. The whole time you're flying, talk. Do not stop talking until I'm tired of listening to you talk on what we're doing. I don't care if it's a Shondell, a lazy eight, eights on pylons, if we're doing a power off 180, whatever it might be, you need to act the maneuver, say act it, but perform the maneuver in the aircraft as well as explain it while you're doing it. He said that'll prepare you to get that stuff going. As far as the teaching, being ready to teach. How do you know when you're ready to teach? It's a really good question. He told me this, and I'll quote Jay Wood on this. And this is true, and I'll say this for everyone. The first couple of students you ever have, they're kind of like guinea pigs because you've never done it before. And here we go. Here's your first time student, and you go with what works, and you kind of feel it out. And then you finally realize, okay, everybody's going to be different. We all have different strengths. Some are really good at ground. Some are really good at plane. Some are really good at landing. Some are good at both. Some are good at this. Some have trouble landing. Some people don't understand holding. Some people grasp some systems really, really well. Some other people struggle. So when it comes to actually teaching someone how to do this, there really is no cut and dry, in my opinion. You just have to be a really good judge of who your student is. And then you have to teach to their strengths and their opportunities.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the CFI is an airman certificate. It's not a grade of pilot certificate. So you already have shown, since you hold a commercial and an instrument rating, if you're applying for a CFI, you've shown that you know and can demonstrate and do yourself all of these tasks, right? There's no question about that. The CFI is a matter of, can you teach it? And can you judge when somebody's ready to do it themselves? And can you wade through the advice that they're going to need and the gray area that's going to inevitably come up and get them scheduled for a check ride and do the paperwork properly and, take somebody with whatever situation they come to you with and baggage and background and all that kind of stuff and put it together into a meaningful whole that's going to culminate in them achieving whatever certificate it is they're trying to go towards. And that's what it's about. But I think a lot of people now, especially, as you want an airline career, and that's, always some sort of professional flying career, being a CFI is not 100% required all the time, but let's face it, that's probably one of the most important milestones in getting yourself to being a pro, right? And just like you said, it wasn't really up for debate whether or not you're going to do it. It was on the table, and just like it was for me. And when I did it, there was a little less emphasis placed on the teaching. It was more just sort of learning to fly from the right seat and talking your way through. And there was questions about regs and, things like that. But even the FSDO, where I'm at, and kudos to them for this, by the way, the examiners really started, or inspectors, I should say, really started putting emphasis, like you said, on the talking thing. Talking all the time. You're acting it out, just like you said. And not only are you acting, but they're going to take a time to act too. So if you're not talking, you need to be actively listening because the student, or actor in this case, is going to be doing things and saying things that they're expecting you to key in on and be like, oh, this is the part they are or aren't getting, or this person's got this, let's move on to something else. Or I detect a little bit of fear or a little bit of anxiety about this maneuver or what have you. And if you're not talking, you're actively listening, and then you're going to start talking again, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So to the question of when did I feel ready to teach? I don't know that I ever did. I mean, I was young and dumb when I did this. So I thought I knew everything anyway. So I just wanted to give that knowledge to other people and fly a lot and, in an enthusiastic way. But I don't think I ever really took the time to sort of say, am I ready to teach this? I just said, oh, I got my certificate, where's my student? But then, as you said, my first student was definitely a guinea pig, and she was great. She was really good. She got her private license. That was what my task was, and And it was cool. But I remember standing there the first time I soloed somebody. I was freaking out. Not because I didn't think that she was ready. I knew she was ready. You know, I felt that she had shown me. She got on a stage check to prove it to someone else. We're all good, but I still, man, that anxiety I felt standing there in the field watching her solo under the tower. It was. I still remember that feeling to this day. And she did a fantastic job and went on and got her license, and she's probably an airline captain now. But you know, I don't think you ever really feel ready. You just kind of go through it. The first few people, hopefully you're learning fast enough that even if their first few lessons weren't great, by the time they're done, you've achieved enough experience. Because, man, as a CFI, you get it fast, really fast. But eventually you'll turn around and be like, yeah, I don't know if I was ready those first few people, but I'm good at it now, and I'm confident in what I can do. And I don't know if there's really a better way to get through it, because you're not just going to feel one day like, hey, yesterday I wasn't ready, but now I am. And so you have to go through those first few, really to cut your teeth and move on, right?
That's true. You brought up a good point with a solo. I felt the same way. Solo in the first person I soloed, probably the first 3 or 4. It was the anxiety I felt was probably as greater than what they felt, although I didn't let anyone know that. I went up in the tower over at McKinney for all of mine that I saw. I haven't soloed any. I have not soloed anyone anywhere but McKinney.
Please tell me you stood there with Pam.
No, actually, she came along after I was not teaching primary anymore, and then Pam got a job at McKinney. So she was with me for all of the really cool instrument stuff I've ever done, and all the neat airplanes I've gotten to fly, things like that. All the cool single engine turboprops. We take the Citation 10 over there once in a while and do landings in it because we don't fly it too much, et cetera, et cetera. And she was there for all that. But I definitely felt those solos in the heart every single time I did one for about the first 4. And then I got more used to it. And of course, just like you said, they were on a stage check with someone that signed them off and said, hey, they're ready to solo.
Yeah. Well, so what about lesson plans then? That was sort of the next follow on here was, did you make your own plans? I know you can, there's no shortage of places you can buy those at this point. I mean, there was pretty much just one book back in the day when I did it. I'm sure everybody knows which one that was. If you learned to do this around late 90s, early 2000s, it was the red spiral binder one. But now, I mean, there's no shortage of places you could get pre-made lesson plans, which of course you won't learn a whole lot off of unless you make them yourself. But what do you think about lesson plans in general?
I did all of my lesson plans. I typed every one of them out. I've got a law library notebook, 3-ring binder, full of the lesson plans to take you all the way through. And then I have a separate 3-ring binder for the IFR.
Okay.
So,
and you made them all yourself from scratch, or
I gave myself carpal tunnel syndrome every night between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. after I would get off work because I still had a full-time job while I was getting my ratings, doing all that stuff. So I did every single one of them. I've got them all in a notebook, and that's when I took my my initial, I got my MEI initial with the feds, and then I got my CFI and II after that. I had that notebook right there, so I had anything he could ask that was out of the, I guess it was the practical test standards, the PTS at the time is what we had. Any of the PTS questions he could possibly ask out of that guide, and any other, I think it's special emphasis areas or any other thing that, he wants, because they can ask whatever they want. I was ready for it.
Sure. Yeah, I remember, I think if there's an answer to this question, I think one of the best ways to do it might be to start with a sort of template. Like I said, I had that red spiral binder thing that was sold back in the day, which I, of course, didn't just copy or show up with. I mean, I made my own thing, but there was a template that it followed at the time what the PTS said to do. But then as I went through it, I at the very least started retyping out of that, like sort of plagiarizing, for lack of a better word. But then I would say, hey, you know what? And here's where I want to put a note about this, or hey, here's a cool diagram I found. I'd copy paste it into the Word document or what have you. And just like you, I have, two binders, one for the private and commercial, and then one for the instrument. And then after that, when I got my MEI, I kind of made this binder just about, I had one of the Duchess actually, but unfortunately that airplane was involved in a fatal mid-air, which we can talk about some other time. But the school eventually got a Seminole to replace the Duchess. And so I started making a binder for new aircraft that I would fly. Like when they got the Seminole, I just made a Seminole binder. And in that binder is where I put all my multi-engine and MEI lesson plans and so on. But, again, it's just a 3-ring binder, so you could grab them all out of there. But, every time I would go through a lesson, I would start with the template that I had from that book, but then I would just put all my personal stuff in there from my experiences. And I found that was really a good way to make it real and to make it relevant and make sure that I passed on these experiences that I had to kind of learn the hard way onto someone else. And even furthermore, I would print off stuff. Like I remember, this was after I got my CFI, but things like this, Hurricane Katrina happened. And somebody at the flight school was smart enough to go into the WSI weather computer that we had and print off the METARs from places all around Louisiana. And so I actually have the METAR still from different airports in Louisiana during a hurricane. And so there were all those things that you see on a METAR that you've never seen before with the crazy winds and all this other stuff. And I would just print off pages of that stuff and stick it in like one of those plastic sheaths that goes in a 3-ring binder and put it in there with the weather stuff. So when we're talking about this, I can be like, hey, read this. This actually happened. And, you just add all of your personal stuff, like anything you can cough up from your personal experience, pictures or what have you. I crawled under the airplane and took pictures of the landing gear actuator system. So I could just slap that in there too. So instead of having to get dirty, we could just look at the picture, but add those things to what might be a pre-made lesson plan. And I think you're going to come up with probably a pretty good recipe.
Yeah, what I did, I plagiarized just a little bit. When I typed out my lesson plans, I followed the suggested format, of course, and then I went with my own experiences, getting my own ratings and how I would do that. And I looked back at a couple of those books for reference on how to perform the maneuvers, et cetera, et cetera. I did add some diagrams in there of things, such as normal takeoff, short field landing, turns around a point, steep turns. Those diagrams, I did copy a few diagrams off and paste. But basically, the entire thing, about, I would say, 75 to 80% was all my work in doing it.
Yeah, I think the more the merrier. It seems overwhelming too. So it's sort of a balance of start with something, sort of like a chef starting with a recipe or at least just an inspiration or an idea of something, so they're not starting from zero. Nobody really starts anything from zero. There's at least an inspiration. But, it's something as complicated as a CFI there's just so much information to cull through. So I think there's no shame in getting a recipe to start with, but then making it your own.
One thing I did do, thinking back on it now, I got 2 instructors that were able to sign off CFIs, because I believe you have to be an instructor for over 2 years.
Correct.
Before you can sign someone off to be a CFI. And I had Adam and Jay. And I remember teaching Adam and Jay every lesson in ground that I made to go get my MEI initial. So that's one thing that I did.
And how did that go?
It went great, because I taught them on the whiteboard as if they were the examiner. And it took it took hours to do it. But that's what I did.
Well, and that kind of circles back to the first question. I wish I had said it there earlier, was how do you know when you're ready to teach? And, you've got those first few guinea pigs that we keep mentioning. And, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, she got to the point where she could probably almost pass a written and she could land a 172 completely all by herself from the traffic pattern. She still married me, and it's good, so it didn't ruin us. But I'd say she was actually probably my first guinea pig. And then, like you say, other students around the flight school, you could maybe grab one of them, and be like, hey man, let me teach you this, see if it works. There's the CFI might not be too happy about that, but whatever. I think I taught a couple lesson plans at one of the famous bars at Purdue to a couple people that were also in the flight program for free, and I think they paid for my beer, but other CFIs as well. And to a degree, the very early guinea pigs, just like a doctor working on a cadaver before they actually get to do any practice. I mean, it doesn't matter how bad you mess up at that point, but that's how you get through those first couple, my God, what am I doing? And then get to the point where you're like, oh, no, that's a good question. Instead of letting it kill your confidence, you're like, oh, that's a good point. I'll add that to my lesson plan and extemporaneously talk about it sort of on the fly. And I think that's sort of how you get those first feelings of, am I ready to teach? Because to somebody who's playing student, or maybe even is a student but not yours, or somebody who couldn't possibly care less, i.e. your girlfriend or something, if you can get the idea across to them, think, maybe I am ready to pass this on to somebody who actually wants to pick it up.
Correct. I did, we did the same thing at the flight school where I was teaching. There were instructors when I started they were my instructors that taught me. And so when I started, I was an instructor at that same place. So they were all familiar with me. And I had a couple of students that were my own. And if they wanted someone to fly, one of their students needed someone to fly with and they were off or on vacation or here and there, they would put them with me, which was really cool because it gave me someone that had a little bit more flight experience than from hour one. And I could go out there and teach that person a lesson, and then they could go give that more experienced instructor feedback, and I could get the feedback and then make myself a better flight instructor as a result.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Word travels fast, and you're sort of already that person's protege, I guess. And yeah, that's a good way to do it for sure. So what about at a place like that, since we brought up flight schools, the very last part of the question here was, is it worth doing a CFI boot camp, like one of those accelerated programs that some flight schools have, or just go through it a little more organically, I guess? What do you think?
I think that's up to the individual and where that individual places their own, I want to say their own brain. Well, I would love to do a CFI boot camp, blah, 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 blah. Well, if that's where your feeling is, then that's probably what you should do. Because if you have a good attitude towards that, then you're probably going to get a good outcome. If you had a good attitude towards doing it organically, doing it all yourself and figuring all that out, and that's the way you wanted to take and the attitude you wanted to have in a positive way towards that, then you probably need to go that route. That's what I would say. I mean, either or.
Yeah, so definitely a gut feel gray area thing here.
Definitely a gray area.
Yeah. It's funny. At my airport, we have one of those pilot factory type schools. I won't say what the name of it is, but we've all heard of it. And, it's sort of I have such mixed feelings because on one hand, you could be a pessimist and say, okay, cool. Well, person who just paid almost 100 G's of borrowed money to learn to fly here. Your CFI was a student pilot last year, and now they're teaching you, and then they're going to be in a regional in 2 months, right? Is that enough experience? Is that a bad thing? But then also on the other hand, people are getting through it and they're being successful. They're passing the check rides. And I know the examiner gives most of them over there, and he's not messing around. I mean, if you don't pass a test, you don't pass a test. And, they're being watched by the FAA, and they turn out competent pilots. And I can't almost even believe it because I was very much more of a do it yourself organically over a longer period of time type person. And, but you're right, for people who that type of thing makes sense, it's probably the most efficient way to do it. I mean, almost definitely is. But in something where efficiency may or may not be your biggest concern, like you say, you take that or leave it. But you're right. If that's how somebody would respond best, for instance, if they're a big procrastinator type and they just kind of need somebody just cramming it in all the time, then yeah, maybe they do real well. And, frankly, as long as they have the knowledge and then they do their little guinea pigging and then move on, then that's it. And I mean, and that place doesn't necessarily hire everybody who graduates the program. It's not like, oh, you graduated, now you're guaranteed a job or something. I mean, if you're not competent, they're not going to pick you up. So, I think it's less of a, is it the right or wrong thing to do in general? I think is it the right or wrong thing to do for you individually, whoever you are?
Sure, you're going to have to be a good self-assessor,
Right.
whatever your assessment of yourself is, and where you think you stand, and that's the direction that you might want to go because your attitude is going to dictate outcome.
Yeah, of course. And, in those accelerated programs too, I mean, those students, it's not like they're just taking a lesson a day and then, that's it. I mean, all the other hours of the day, they're expected to be there studying and doing their groups and things like that. And they're teaching each other. And it's actually a pretty neat thing to see. I mean, I don't know that I would have done the best in that environment, which is why I chose not to. I mean, I did mine a little more organically because that school, it wasn't at our airport at the time, but, it was in existence. I could have done it. But much like you, I kind of chose to do it the other way and then became an instructor at that school and then also at the university I was at and so on. So, I mean, that for me was the right thing to do, but I would never discourage anybody from doing it the other way who, thinks that would be the right thing to do for them. I think it's just whatever you think is right. And then if you're getting it and you're successful, then that's really what matters in the end.
Exactly. I mean, I have nothing to add to that. That's perfect.
Well, so special thanks to Daniel for sending that question in. That was actually a really good topic. So I really appreciate that. And if anybody else has any topics they'd like to have the great Chad Fortenberry discuss, then make sure to send those on in. But before you go, Chad, what else is going on? What's next for you?
Oh, next year, this coming up month, I've got some cool stuff going on. I've got in August, I've got a TBM recurrent lined up with a guy in a 700 Bravo. I've got a couple of trips to Fort Lauderdale going on. I've got some M600 flying to do with a really good friend of both mine and Brandon's. And I also have some TBM teaching up in Oklahoma City going on with a gentleman that's also a good friend and has been for a long time now, as well as some. He has a 930, and then I've got a little TBM 850 going on with another good friend, and he has since moved out of California to Austin and Boulder, Colorado. So he's got a house in each. So I'll be doing some flying out of Boulder, and I've already done a little flying out of Austin, but I'll be going up to Boulder.
That is the perfect flight for a TBM. You got two houses in those places. That's kind of the dream, I think.
Oh, Austin to Boulder. I think it's like 2 hours and 10 minutes or something.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's perfect. Not bad places to be either.
Absolutely. Oh no, Austin's cool, and Boulder's. I mean, wow! Especially if you like the outdoors, hiking and mountain biking and doing all that stuff in the summertime, pretty cool place to go flying too. And then you've got the snow skiing going on in the wintertime, which that's my personal favorite.
Yeah, me too. All right, man. Well, very last bit before you go here, the rest of this episode has been about enthusiasm, right? Because I think I lost mine for a while. You know that, but it's back. The show's back. If you don't believe me, and then here we are. But how do you stay enthusiastic about not just flying, but all the other things that you do? I mean, be it, you're very big into physical fitness. Maybe that's something we should do a podcast on one of these days too. But fitness, flying, family, all that stuff. How do you stay enthusiastic about those things, even through rough times?
Well, you know what? That's a great question. I've never had to think about it. I guess I'm really fortunate in that way. I've always been a really high energy individual, somebody that used athletics as a kid in order to be able to focus in the classroom. I figured out that if I ran in the mornings, then I could focus throughout the day. I had to get rid of some of that energy. That's where the distance runner in me came out. That turned into distance running / just really kind of running and weightlifting somewhere around the age of 20, 21-ish, and just kept going with it. I've always had a high amount of energy to get rid of, and I've always been enthusiastic about life and the things that I'm passionate about. Aviation, always one of them, but running, weightlifting, snow skiing, I have always been super involved in that stuff. And I will say that my dad, he always taught me, you only go around once. You need to have a really good time when you do it. And when I look back at that and that advice, and it seems really elementary to say that, well, it's helped me out a lot, because when I was just asked this question by Brandon, I don't really have an answer other than I love life, and I always have. So I've been very fortunate in that respect.
All right, well, that felt good. I hope you got something out of that talk with Chad. I know I always do when I talk to him. It's hard to describe, but I hope you feel like me that his style of doing things is just so straightforward. Cuts out all the BS, not in a corner-cutting way, but it's distilled, as it should be, into a simple and, most importantly, usable way of going about your aviation life. And it's always funny because when Chad and I met back in the day, I think I had more time and I'd been doing this a little bit longer too, but I was about to skew off into this alternate ATC reality, and now he's something of a mentor to me. And if you'd like Chad to be a mentor to you, well, make sure you send in your questions and your feedback so we can get him on the show. And if you didn't already know, of course, the place to send that is Brandon at podcastingonaplane.com. And if you don't want to do it in writing, you can use your smartphone to record something, or use the SpeakPipe widget that pops up when you visit podcastingonaplane.com to record something, and we can't wait to hear what's on your mind. While you're on the website, maybe consider supporting the show financially too. If you have the means and you find value in it, I'd really appreciate having you on board as a patron. You'll get episodes early. Patrons already know that because they've already heard this one, and some other fun stuff too. And if you want to be just like all of our newest patrons we talked about before, go to podcastingonaplane.com and click on support. If you're not into that recurring thing though, I don't blame you. There's a PayPal link right there too for whatever you feel is right. And as always, I thank you so much for your support in whatever form it takes, and for listening to the show and sending in feedback and passing along the word about this or any aviation podcast you like to your friends. That's all for now. Your frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day.
The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. Brandon's comments and those of his guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc., are not part of his official responsibility as a controller or as an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are his, and those of his guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. Also, while he's a CFI, he's not acting as your CFI, nor is he your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice or legal counsel. If you're in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.